Hello, everyone. This is just there's no special name to this broadcast. Just hi. I'm here with is it Mr. or Doctor
How about Ward?
Ward? With Ward Crocker,
Yeah,
and his I guess pupil Dreas Sanchez. I believe he's in your class.
one of my students. Yep.
Yeah. We also have Ozymandias and Hogtie Champ are both with us as well. And I believe Dre said we're discussing morality, but honestly, I'm up to any discussion. Anyway, let's just get some introduction. What do you do? Tell us something about you. Dre has been kind of vague.
Oh well, like a lot of the people, I teach and teach on philosophy, apologetics, Christian, and professor here at Southern California Seminary. So I enjoy quality discussions. I'm looking for myself. One of the things I look for is some people to talk to about a variety of issues, and I'd like to be able to find people who are willing to extend the conversation over time, and just say, okay, here's what we believe, compare and contrast. I think can be very helpful, can be helpful to others to learn what both sides or other sides believe, and it's something that I enjoy doing. I've had, like other people, had a variety of conversations, and like to get back into it on certain levels. So, yeah. So I teach.
All right.
How about yourself? What do you do, JD?
Nothing having to do with the great debate, other than just kind of as something interesting. I like to know what people believe and why. I am, for all intents and purposes, a philosophical naturalist. I don't think anything exists that doesn't obey, discoverable natural laws.
Okay.
I think this particular phrasing is new, but the position is old. Is that I think the existence is eternal, but the universe is contingent on some unknown, from before Planck time, and that what that was probably natural, given that everything we observe is also natural and probably material in some sense.
Okay.
That's the basics.
That's a synopsis.
As far as morality, I'm kind of all over the map. I like moral realism, but I think everything is, in essence, if you get down far enough, everything has a subjective preference at the bottom of all of it. Because every possible moral phrase can be challenged. Anyway, that's enough about that's the start. Ozzy, you want to go next?
Okay.
Hi. How you doing?
Hi, Ward. I'm Ozzy. Ozzy is just short for my YouTube username, Ozymandias. And I'm a YouTuber. I make videos about the Great Debate. And I would describe myself as a provisional atheist. My background is also in philosophy, specifically contemporary analytic philosophy, although I have an abiding interest in the philosophy of religion. I taught a course in philosophy of religion when I was a grad student. I was never a professor or anything like that. I was just a teaching assistant. So I taught undergraduates when I was myself a grad student. And I don't describe myself as a philosophical naturalist myself, although I sort of somewhat inclined that way. I subscribe to something called neutral monism. I think
I didn't catch that. Something monism?
Neutral monism.
Neutral.
Yeah, you familiar with the term?
No, I'm familiar with idealistic monism and materialistic monism. But,
okay. It's neutral monism is a term that serves dual purposes. It's a term that is used in metaphysics to sort of describe one's position on the landscape with respect to idealism and physicalism or materialism, naturalism, that sort of thing. It also is used to describe a person's position. It's completely orthogonal in the cognitive sciences and the question of the mind-body problem. So you can be a neutral monist with respect to one and not the other, or both. As it happens, I happen to be a neutral monist with respect to both of those, the mind-body problem and ontology. Neutral monism is the view that our concepts of the mental and our concepts of the physical are pre-theoretical intuitions that we are slowly starting to understand through science and philosophy, but the concept of the physical and the concept of the mental, or the ideal, neither one of those concepts can fully capture or describe reality. So I can't find myself. I can't bring myself to commit to philosophical naturalism. But that shouldn't be taken to imply that I believe in anything called the supernatural either. But only because I can't think of any exemplars or instances of supernatural phenomena. I don't think we have in hand any established supernatural phenomena. But I'm not allergic to the concept of the supernatural. I think of the concept of supernatural as a kind of placeholder for any phenomena we might discover that might be sufficiently weird and different from what we classify as natural to warrant putting under a different heading. And did my camera just go off again? I'm having
just for a moment.
Yeah, for some reason I'm having camera troubles with this laptop. Anyway, so I guess that would capture my position. And with respect to morality, I subscribe to virtue-based ethics. So,
you do? Oh,
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you approved.
Yeah.
So
just, I'm willing to give credit where credit's due. I mean, I'm not one who doesn't. Just so you know, one of my attempts is to do that. So
okay,
I'm sure we would disagree on, some grounding of it. And
well, the ontology of it we would probably disagree on. I imagine you would ground yours in the concept of God. Actually, I'm very encouraged to hear you countenance the concept of virtue-based ethics because
people do.
Yeah, well, no, but even even if you didn't approve of it, that you're familiar that it's a
breath of fresh air.
The reason I say that is not that I'm surprised that you know about it. It's that Andreas and I, in a comment exchange some months ago, we just had a very brief exchange, and I mentioned virtue-based ethics, and he sort of scoffed and said that I was making something up. Of course, it's not. It's a very august ethical position that sort of straddles deontology and consequentialist views. So it's orthogonal to both. So
I concur. Yeah, I concur in part. So yeah, cool. But very nice. And so, what do you do otherwise?
Well, I'm early retired actually. I left academia before I finished my PhD actually, so I don't have a doctorate in philosophy. But I worked in the private sector as a trainer in various corporate settings, and then I was, through good luck and some good financial planning, mostly on my wife's part, I was able to retire early. So I've been retired ever since. So
it's great having a great wife.
And
having a good wife,
Yeah, it's about the best decision you can make is marrying the right
person. We were really just that's a hell of an introduction, Ozy. Very thorough.
Let's see. There's three though, wasn't there? Three of you guys?
Yeah, Hogtie. I was gonna.
Yeah, I can introduce for a moment. I sort of with those introductions and knowing that Andreas is a student in an ethics class, I sort of feel like I'm going to be taking up the rear of the pack today on that. So, just by brief introduction. So my name's Hogtie Champ. Most people just call me Hogtie, and I been dealing with Christians of various stripes over a few years online. I try to sort of have some good civil discussions. There are some where that's just not possible. They get a little cuckoo, yeah. But I think my interest in contributing to the community really had come in the areas of science, and where most people would know me from, and you should not be at all embarrassed to not know me from this, but there's a show called The Magic Sandwich Show, which was initially kind of a panel of science-interested people that would talk about science issues, biology, geology, what have you. And it seems in recent years that there's been more of a discussion about philosophy and apologetics, and some of us in science have kind of are learning we're under-equipped when it comes to philosophy. So we've been joined by some good minds, like people like Ozy, and there's another fellow, Floyd FP, that's really knowledgeable about this stuff, and I always find like I'm sort of back to day one at school. So I actually used to teach ethics in the Faculty of Medicine at a fairly major university, and I recognize that that's a sham. That the medical ethics is taught by people who are sort of given a little toolkit, a little Dick and Jane coloring book about the bare bones of ethics, and they say, "Here you go."
They're doing what they can.
Yeah, try to teach those young people not to kill a bunch of people when they're in practice. But I've also since retired from academics. I've taken on a very different job that I enjoy a lot. I get to travel a whole bunch. I was in a little town just last week called Trochu, Alberta, is where I was last week. If you care.
Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Where about? I was in Canada for a while, so in Alberta. Where about?
Yeah.
Where's Horseshoe at?
Well, I was going to say, okay. I thought you'd, yeah. I don't mean to, be nosy. It's just that Dreas had had spoken of you in a previous conversation. Dreas has sort of comes to these hangouts with a lot of enthusiasm about materials he's learning, and he's said a couple of, well, my professor says this, my professor says that, and we expressed interest in meeting you. And then, of course, when you kindly agreed and revealed your name, not to be nosy, it's the internet. You want to check people out. So I Googled, and I found out you went to not the seminary, whatever it is, in Three Hills. Trochu is like 15 minutes from Three Hills.
Oh, it is? Okay. I was wondering, 'cause I heard the name. Is that, it's like, yeah, I think I'm familiar. Okay.
Yeah, well, Three Hills is closer to an actual town, and Trochu is more like a gas station, and the gas station.
I know what you're talking about. That's why I asked. It sounds familiar.
It is a beautiful place, but yeah. So I'm actually.
What put you up there?
Yeah, I'm from northern Alberta, but I get a lot of the stuff I do these days are down in southern Alberta, so I'm learning about Torrington and Trochu and Three Hills and places like that. But yeah, so that's we've all kind of taken our journey through life, and I find this discussion online to be really interesting. And as I mentioned before, I engage a broad spectrum of different theists and on a broad spectrum of topics. And I just got to say, you never know when you start a conversation how it's going to go, like what the other person's attitude is going to be like. So I got to sit back and listen for a while.
All right. I need to vanish for a quick moment. My fiance came in the room and wants to talk about something. It shouldn't be too long, but Dreas has not had any chance to introduce himself, and I kind of know a lot about Dreas already, so I'll let him go and do that in my absence. So, Dreas, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'll be quick because I know Professor doesn't have much time, and I don't need very much introduction. I'm 28. Actually, no, I'm 29. I just turned 29. My baby boy is due in December, and I have a beautiful wife, which is definitely one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm finishing up my bachelor's at Southern California Seminary, where Professor teaches. I'm actually retired as well, so it seems like these Google communities are retired cats. I'm actually, I got medically retired from the military, so it's a blessing and come with a little bit of baggage, but everything is straight with that. And I'm just here to learn, and I like meeting people, and I love, just like Professor said earlier, to meet the people with the other side of the view, and then be able to have a really good conversation. And because like you said, you never know what you can learn. So I appreciate that. And just for clarification, not that it matters, but my issue with virtue ethics was that it's grounded in an absolute. That was my issue with it. But I'm sure in the course of these hangouts we'll get to that. So that's my intro. I'm going to go back on mute and let the big boys talk. So I appreciate it.
As I recall, Dreas, it wasn't that it wasn't grounded in anything absolute or anything of the sort. You actually scoffed and said that it was made up. It was a made up term.
I'm sure I didn't do that. You can simply Google it.
Yeah,
you can Google the term.
I don't think you had at the time though.
Yeah, I think it was Sokka the one who first mentioned that he's a virtue ethicist in that conversation.
Yeah, it was in a hangout, I believe, and then there was a comment where we went back and forth about it.
If I remember, my initial, I guess, problem I had with Dreas was we were discussing the presupposition of the existence of other minds. We were talking about, at a certain point, you have to presuppose other minds' belief because you can't actually solve the problem from the first person perspective.
We all just introduced
ourselves. There was a what? Was that Dre?
We all just introduced ourselves as separate, individually existing, independent minds.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess you could say inductively, but we're also assuming that everything we're talking to actually has a mind. This still has to be assumed. There's really no way to prove it, which was kind of the point. It's why it's an unsolved problem in philosophy. Anyway, Ward, I don't know if you do you have a position on the problem of other minds, or is it?
I do. What I'd like to do, and we can talk about that. We can talk about whatever. I'd love to be able to go through different issues, but I prefer just staying on topic. Like we talked about morality before.
Sure.
Yeah. Problem of minds, great, not a problem. It is, but not
it's a different subject
issue. But I prefer hopefully staying on topic and hopefully getting some groundwork going on it, and then helping and building from there. So that's kind of my goal in conversation.
Yeah, no problem.
Does that work?
I agree. It's always good not to jump around too much.
So, because it's easy. I mean, they all feed each other. You know very well how much they feed each other, and it's a lot of fun. I'm just curious about morality and where you gentlemen stand. Obviously, I stand on it objective morality stance, I'll be glad to, elaborate more on that. But what can we agree with? What can we disagree with, and why? On the issue of morality, if it's objective, subjective, how it's grounded ontologically or not. There are different positions that atheists take, or non-theists, and just curious where you gentlemen would fall on that spectrum, and we can launch into that discussion for a bit here in our time.
Actually, I got to ask a question then, and I'm sure Ozy's addressed this 100 times, but we hear the phrase objective morality, so objective versus subjective, absolute versus relative. We hear those words used so often that I swear to you, I don't know what they mean. So as soon as you say objective morality, I literally, and like I've had people ask me, like, oh, so do you believe in objective morality? I'll say, well, I don't know what that means. And they go, well, how can you deny absolute morality?
Right.
Well, those aren't the same thing. Are they the same thing? So can you give us, is there a 1 or 2 sentence description of what that means?
That's great. I love definitions. Grade student papers, for instance, definitions. So I love the fact that you want to begin there. What I mean by an objective moral, something that's objectively moral, is regardless of human opinion, that moral issue is right or wrong. So it's right or wrong regardless. If the human race did not exist, the idea of, to use Sam Harris' example and modify it maybe a little bit, using extreme examples, these gentlemen realize in philosophy we use extreme examples. Scraping the eyeballs out of babies is objectively wrong, morally wrong, and at no time would that be a morally acceptable issue. So that's how I'm taking it. So, and there can be some subjective morality. Would be something like this: the speed limit. The speed limit is a moral issue. I try and keep it down, but should it be 55 miles an hour? Should it be 56 miles an hour? Should it be 57 miles an hour? Well, there's a subjective element to it, and that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody on all freeways. That's fine, but it's still a moral decision. But it's not objective, as in the scraping out of baby eyeballs, as an extreme example. Does that help clarify what I am intending by it?
It does, but in my mind, it sort of draws us to the point that I'm always stumbling over when we discuss objective morality, and that is that if we're to view that there's some sort of morals that's out there in the ether, if I can borrow or misuse that phrase, that it's just sort of the nature of reality that this is right and that is wrong, and it's independent of minds. Well, my understanding is that morals are a framework, a belief system, right? Assessments and beliefs. I mean, these are all things that are properties of the subject. I find that the term itself, objective morality, that is objective beliefs, that is beliefs that are not held by a subject, I find that just paradoxical wording. I think that's where I kind of rest confused.
Well, so I would elicit from what you're saying then that you couldn't have an objective morality. Correct me where I'm wrong. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. You could not have an objective morality without a mind.
Right. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
Okay. So that's why I would ground that in the divine. Okay, because he would be an eternal mind. He would have that. Without the eternal mind, what you're talking about is a problem. Okay, and so that would drive you. I think that out of necessity, it seems, to drive us to the issue of there's no place to ground it. We don't have a divine mind to ground it, and to use that phrase. So then, where does it apply? Well, it could only be in cognitively. Therefore, it would be human-based discussion. Therefore, it would end up being subjective, and that means that whatever we say as a society or as a person would be what morality is, and then there's no complaints against. There's no justification to complain against ISIS. Which I think we should complain against ISIS. There's no complaint against the drug cartel, who is slaughtering thousands of people because they're greedy and they want their money and power. And I'm under the impression, anyway, that we need to complain about those things objectively.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of where I get in that conversation. Maybe I'll step back a bit to let the more people with more refined than me views on this. Is that as soon as I make that statement that, well, I don't see how this objective morality thing works because moral is an assessment, right? So there has to be a mind doing this assessment. It doesn't necessarily have to be human. It can be God or it can be whatever, any creature with sentience. Is that they say, oh, so you believe in subjective morality? Oh, well, so you're a moral relativist. Oh, so you think it's okay to rape babies? Like that's generally where the conversation goes. I appreciate that's not where you're going with it, but you do sort of tread upon it a little bit when you say that. Well, I mean, are you suggesting that we lose our footing? Let me know, because I do want to respect your time. So I apologize. I just sort of want to get, that was my 2 cents in on it.
No. I appreciate that. This is the right thing to bring up. I love it, by the way. And that's why I'm trying to lay out where we're coming from on this. Get some hopefully get some unity and cut out, here we are, and discuss the differences and seeing what to me makes what makes the most sense to you, to me, and laying out the options. Where it goes logically is, it seems, it doesn't mean that, okay, where it goes logically is, it doesn't seem like there is a moral difference then. If there is no objective morality, it's hard to understand how there is a moral difference between torturing a baby versus, sacrificing your life for a baby. More than just emotional. Is there an objective difference between those two? And if there is, I think we're onto something there. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean that you are an immoral person. I don't go around thinking that atheists live immoral lives. I've met some very fine atheists and would trust them more than some Christians I've talked with. So, but that's only a social observation. So,
I think part of it is because of my unrefined use of those terms like subjective and objective, and I think Ozy's kind of chomping there to perhaps he can sort of help me, I guess.
Yeah, Ozy, you wanted to mention. Well, you go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to step back a little bit with respect to the subjectivity and objectivity with respect to morality. One of the most common confusions in all of the talk about objectivity in this discourse is the assumption that, and it's a mistaken assumption, that if a judgment issues from a subjective agent, then that judgment can't refer to or be about something objective, right? I mean, and it's a complete non sequitur to say that because a judgment issues from a subject, therefore that which they're talking about is itself subjective. That doesn't follow. That's a non sequitur.
I would agree with that.
And if that were true, it would mean literally that there's no reality, not even a subjective reality, because even the idea of a subjective reality
or at least
issues
none that we get in touch with.
Yeah, that's right. So this is basically Metaphysics 101. Nothing about the reality or unreality of something, whatever it is you're talking about, can be inferred from the fact that the thought of that thing issues from a subjective being. Everything, absolutely everything is mediated by our consciousness and through our subjectivity, right? And so absolutely nothing about the ontological status of the object of your thought, right, its reality, right, can be inferred from the fact that it issues through your subjectivity. Every object you think of is thought about and through thought, obviously, and so that implies nothing about the ontological status of what you're thinking about or of what you're referring to. That's just a fact that says something about thinking. It doesn't tell you anything about the object to which you refer. So just as it's not true that something exists merely because you can think about it, like you can think about a unicorn, it doesn't suddenly come into existence, it's similarly true that something can't be judged to not exist simply because it's a product of thinking. Right? You simply can't conclude anything about the nature of morality simply because we have judgments about morality. Right? Now, one can marshal an argument and argue for emotivism or something like that, and try to argue that that morality is non-cognitive, that there's nothing real about it. It reduces all to preferences. I mean, there is an argument to be made for that. It's not an argument that I would stand behind, but there is an argument that could be made for that. But that argument can't consist of the fact, or can't rest solely on the fact that people make judgments, and judgments are subjective things. Everything is a subjective judgment. I mean, I'm perceiving a coffee mug here. I mean, that's a subjective judgment, right? But it doesn't follow from that therefore there's no coffee mug. Math is as objective an area of discourse as you could hope to have. But I mean, it's all going on in our heads. You can't bump into the number 6. You can't weigh the number 6. There's no sense in which it's objective in that sense, right? So the question of the objectivity of morality can't be decided. That is, the subjectivity or objectivity of morality can't be decided based on that observation that we have judgments, that our moral judgments are judgments and therefore are subjective experiences and subjective claims. And with respect to what people mean by objectivity in the moral sphere, in the great debate, people equivocate all the time. Sometimes they mean by objective any fact that's equally accessible to any competent observer. Like, this is a coffee mug. That's a fact that's equally accessible to any competent observer. Sometimes people use the word objectivity to refer to a fact that doesn't depend for its existence upon a mind, any mind. Right? That's sort of what we were talking about here. Sometimes what people mean by objectivity is any moral rule or precept that is universal in its applicability. And sometimes people mean that it's exceptionless, or sometimes people mean that it's unchanging, or all of the above, or any, you can pick and choose from this list. But so there's an awful lot of equivocation. So I think it's very valuable when you're talking about objective morality, what you mean by objective. In my case, what I mean by objective morality is that I think that there are states of affairs and moral truths, moral facts, supervene on states of affairs that are in fact equally accessible to any competent observer. But these are not easily decidable things. It's kind of like, getting at the truth of what happened in the War of 1812 or something like that, right? That is something that is in principle discoverable and answerable. But it's not always answerable now, and it's almost never easy to answer such questions. And I think moral questions have that character. So I think that there are objective moral features, that is, there are objective features of reality that ultimately undergird the veracity of a moral claim. But these are not intuitive, these are not straightforward and easy to answer. I think moral truths are there to be discovered. I'm a moral realist, I believe in moral facts, so I believe in moral objectivity. And I would ground those ontologically in states of affairs that bear on the well-being of sentient beings, specifically the predictable.
It's I don't mean to cut you off. I just.
No, it's okay.
Along Sam Harris line, well-being, is that what you mean, or just well-being? When you say well-being, are you talking about the physical functioning of the agent in question?
Well, it would include that, but it wouldn't be limited to that. By well-being, I mean eudaimonia. I mean the old Aristotelian idea of flourishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Mentally.
Mentally, emotionally, socially, yeah, exactly. So well-being doesn't just include your physical well-being; it includes your mental, emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Because I believe that people have a telos. I believe that eyes are for seeing and hands are for grasping, and we have certain emotional states that have proper functions. And I think that these functions exist as a result of teleonomic causes. I don't think they're teleological. I think they're teleonomic in character. They're unpurposed. They have causes, but they don't have reasons ultimately for them. But the fact is that we are constituted the way we are. And being constituted the way we are, there are certain things that conduce to our flourishing, our well-being, to eudaimonia, the life well lived, the happy life. And the concept of flourishing and happiness has to be construed broadly, not narrowly as just some temporary hedonic satisfaction, but a much larger sense of happiness. I mean, if you construe it narrowly, then what you should be doing is just shooting up heroin all the time, right? Obviously, even a hedonist doesn't believe in that kind of happiness. If you're a hedonist, you're going to reject becoming a drug addict because that doesn't actually conduce to happiness. So, of course, I'm not a hedonist, but I construe well-being that way in the old Aristotelian sense of eudaimonia, of flourishing.
All right. It gives me a rough sketch. What you're talking about there? I'm sure there's more involved. What about, is it?
There is, yeah. Yeah, that's a
JD or TD?
JD.
Maybe. What do you for yourself there?
Yeah. Well, it's the problem with letting like the philosophically astute people go first. Now I'm like, hi, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm gonna sound like an idiot, but that's okay because Anyway, I disagree with Ozy a little bit. I like moral realism, but I think besides the undergirding, there's another foundation that is necessarily subjective, and that it comes down to the values of the individual. I think morality is best thought of as a system like mathematics, where you set down some basic presuppositions, some assumptions, some axioms that we're going to run from. Like the base 10 system is subjectively chosen in a sense. You can use a different system if you want. You'll come up with different answers. But from within the system, within the base 10 system, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. And within a certain moral system, where reducing suffering is good, decreasing well-being is bad, then you can't discuss facts about the world and determine objectively whether one course of action is better than another. Extreme examples, of course, are the easiest ones. Is it better or worse to torture a baby for fun? Well, no. Under these assumptions, no. But of course, anyone with a mind can challenge these assumptions. And so, while I tend to act in a way that most people would consider moral, I do kind of accept that I think there is a subjective grounding because we are talking about values. And while there is an evolutionary basis for why we act the way we do, I don't think that's enough because now we're trying to reason past just how we've evolved. And so I don't think. I mean, I think when you try to make them objective, you start running into fallacious reasoning. Like, well, so everyone else thinks that way. Well, isn't that an argument from population? That's not usually a good thing. So yeah, while most people would agree on some of the underlying assumptions, not everyone does. Not everyone has to. However, if both two people have the same goals and act differently, well, then one of them is right and one of them is wrong. But if you have different goals, and the way I look at this is I posit someone who has the opposite system I do. Well, I think it's good to reduce suffering. This person thinks it's great to increase suffering. And what argument can I give to them when they have different assumptions starting from the base? Now, from inside my own moral framework, what they're doing is horrible. But from inside their own, they're doing the best possible thing. Well, what if they don't want a long life? No, they want to die as soon as possible. So whatever they're doing is meeting their value, their value judgments. And while I will still judge them, I will still stop them because it violates something core to my moral system. I can't really say it's wrong to the universe. I don't think there's anything out there that can set rules that we necessarily must follow. I know it's kind of weird, the two universe thing, but
yeah,
so honestly kind of get a quizzical look there. Like,
yeah, why does morality, like, why does it have to be sort of cosmologically wrong? Doesn't it just have to be right or wrong, true or false? I mean,
well, it's really just a fancy way of saying there is no fact that says you must do this way without some assumptions to start with.
Okay, well, ask yourself this, JD, though. If within your system, let's say the way you put it, you said, if you start with these values, then morality is a kind of means and calculus, right? And if these are your goals and these are your objectives, then this is what you ought to do, right? And if you have a different system, different starting values, then you'll end up with different moral conclusions, right?
Right.
But ask yourself, within any given system, okay, within whatever yours happens to be, whatever starting values you begin with, are there not facts that bear on the veracity of that conclusion given your starting values? Wouldn't you say that's the case?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, but so then what that is to say is that whatever the values are that we ought to have, right, that are the correct ones to have, assuming there's such a thing, and of course that's an issue. But whatever starting values there are, once you have those values in place, then it is possible in principle, if not always in practice, that there is a rational procedure for arriving at the right conclusion, the right course of action in any given circumstance, right?
Yeah, given everyone using the same assumptions, then yes, there will be a correct course of action.
No. I mean, just within for one person, then that person's system, right?
Right.
Okay, but if that's true for one person, okay, then one can ask from one individual to another, can your starting values be right or wrong? Can you be mistaken about what is what your starting values are, what your ultimate values are? Can a person be mistaken? Can there not be facts that bear on whether or not you should have the starting values that you have or whether you should have different starting values. I would argue that there are. I think that it is possible for a person to have certain values that they start with that are the values that are not the ones that it makes sense for them to have.
Well, I have to say, I mean, moral realism intrigues me. I like it more than what I've kind of concluded with, but I cannot think of a way. Maybe the people here, you guys can help me with this. I can't figure out a way to tell someone who values the suffering of others to say that they're wrong to do that. Other than, I mean, I can make arguments say like, well, it doesn't really fit with how we've evolved and it's going to end the species. But if he doesn't care about that, how am I going to? Yeah. Well, what makes my position better than his?
Right. Okay. But this is a little bit like arguing with someone who doesn't care about the truth. Okay. Just as this is an analogy. Okay. Just imagine that you're arguing with someone and you put forward a really good argument, and they go, yeah, I see your point, but I don't care. And you go, wait a minute. You know, A implies B, B implies C, therefore A implies C. Why are you denying that A implies C if you agree that A implies B and B implies C? And they say, well, I don't care. I just don't care that I'm being rationally incontinent here, that I'm violating some rational principle or something. I just don't care about the truth. What are you going to do? If a person doesn't care about the truth, you can't persuade them, right? Now, by parallel reasoning here, if a person has different values than your own, you might not be able to persuade them. So the question that people always ask is, yeah, but what do you say to a person who starts with different values? Well, sometimes there's nothing you can say. Sometimes a person just has different starting values.
Well, my kind of thing is how would I explain to someone that my values are correct? The basest foundations of my moral framework are the right ones to have, and that's where I struggle. Yeah, well, you have to have some sense of why you have the base values that you yourself have, and that's the difficulty that people run into. Most of us drink in our values with our mother's milk, and I mean, there's some reflective equilibrium that happens in the course of life, but most of us start off with some very basic values that we just drink in through our culture, and we feel them in our bones, and then they feel truths, and we don't really have much in the way of a defense of them. And so when we're put upon to try to explain to another person why we think their values are wrong and our values are right, we've never really thought of it, and we don't know what to say to persuade them. But the point I was trying to get at there is, it's not important that you can't persuade another person. That's why I give the example of, what if a person didn't care about the truth? What if a person didn't care about modus ponens and the principle of identity, or the principle of non-contradiction? What if a person just didn't value those in his or her epistemology? How would you persuade them of anything? You couldn't get as far as persuading them that they should adopt your system, because they would completely reject every tool at your disposal that you could try to leverage them into your position. Well, that's kind of why I posit someone who has the opposite view of mine.
Right, but
I have a hard time trying to find a reason why their foundations would be incorrect.
But but see if you can see the analogy here. Could you convince a person who just said, I repudiate logic, could you convince them that they're making a mistake in repudiating logic?
Yes.
Well, not by logical means you couldn't.
I believe so.
Yes, you can.
What could you use? I mean, he repudiates
you could use death.
You could what?
You can use death. An objective truth. If you use an objective truth, which the best one in my opinion is death, you can convince somebody not to die, because it's possible you can die.
Well, what if he says, yeah, well, I don't think that follows, I don't care that it follows? What if he says, yeah, okay, well, I don't care? I mean, if a person just doesn't care about
that person is saying that about their life, then if that person says that about their life, then we need to conclude they have a psychological disorder.
Well, it doesn't matter though. I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But
it does matter, because now we can't look at that no longer to figure out this problem we're trying to figure out, because this person is no longer in this same reality we are, which is the objective reality, which is another proof that an objective reality does exist.
Presumably, there's only one reality. That's what we mean by reality. There's no such thing as being in your reality, my reality. There's your perception of reality. There's my perception of reality. But reality, the concept of reality, means the actual. What is the case? Whatever it is that is the case.
Yeah, I think we've explained once before that if there was absolutely nothing, that would be what reality is. There would still be reality. It would just be a state of absolutely nothing. So, yeah, reality is not something that
exists.
If God exists, it's in reality.
But anyway, JD, just to return to your point, the point of the analogy is that you would not sort of think, oh well, geez, I don't know how to rationally persuade another person who repudiates logic, right? I don't have any tools at my disposal. Similarly, I can't persuade a person to adopt my moral values if they have different starting moral values. But so what? So the fact that I can't persuade another person doesn't mean that there's something wrong with my system. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with the other person's system, right? But whatever reasons you have for adopting the values that you do, whatever reasons you have, or whatever causes there are for your values, those are the ones that you have to think through and try to articulate for yourself, and then evaluate and ask yourself whether or not those are the values that you ought to have. You can't sort of worry too much about how am I going to convince some other person who might be stubbornly clinging to another set of values alien to my own, right? I mean, it seems to me that morality is something that, first and foremost, you have to sort of work on yourself and try to figure out why you espouse and embrace the values that you espouse and embrace. Not worry too much about how you would persuade some other person. You have to sort of do this kind of unflinching introspection and ask yourself, why do I value what I value? And the first thing to do there is to ask yourself, how did I come to value what I value? And I think what happens is a lot of people despair. They realize that they just drank them in with their culture, and they don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
they stop there. And
like most people, I mirrored my parents. Mirror neurons fired, and I did what my parents did, and that kind of led me, that led me to they gave me the foundation of what I came to. Now I can look back and try and rationally justify that, but in essence, I wasn't thinking it through. I was simply, what my parents did is what is moral to me.
Well, can I share why this issue doesn't really get liftoff for me, and I imagine a lot of people, is okay. We generally get into this issue. It kind of treads into the so-called open question. More is open, yeah. Where somebody says, well, why is this right and that wrong? Pick two behaviors, whatever, who cares? And you say, well, because you don't want to harm people. We want to do things that increase benefit to people. We want to do things that go to flourishing. Then they'll say, well, why is it important to improve human flourishing? Why is it important to save lives and that sort of thing? And those are all interesting questions. But where I kind of get stuck on it is when I think, okay, we're talking about morality. Is that not the essence of what we mean when we say, hey, let's sit down and talk about morality? Obviously, we're talking about those things that are beneficial towards human flourishing. That itself is the definition. Now, I want to contrast it in this way. I will say my position sort of leans more towards JD's, where you say we have a system with some goals and we do some calculus within that system. So it would be like, okay, I have a choice right now. Should I do this thing? I have this behavior X that I'm going to choose to engage in. And it might be something like, should I castle my king after my opponent has moved the queen's rook? Is it the right thing to do to castle my king? Well, wait a second. We're talking about having a good game of chess, where my goal is to win a game of chess, right? Whereas, so we're assuming that when you ask a question like that, you're talking about, well, how do I have a good, enjoyable game of chess in which I succeed? But as soon as we say, well, no, let's not talk about chess today. Let's talk about morality. Well, obviously, that's what we have this notion that we ought to do things to encourage human flourishing and to not cause harm to others and that sort of thing. And when we choose to sit and discuss those things, we need a name for that, and we put the name on it, morality. That is what morality is. So when somebody says, why should we do this or not do that, what you're actually saying is, if I want to help people, if I want to encourage human flourishing, then what ought I do under these circumstances? This is sort of like the example of, if you say, well, if you know somebody who has cancer, should they get chemotherapy or surgery or eat apricot pits ground up? Well, here's the thing. If your goal is you want to keep people alive, then you give them proper chemotherapy and surgery and things as opposed to radiotherapy, and you don't give them ground up apricot seeds, because those things are demonstrably consistent with your stated goals or your implied goals that you're trying to keep people alive. And you guys are essentially asking the question now, yeah, but what happens if you know somebody who doesn't want to keep people alive? Okay, well, that's a different question, right? Am I wrong in saying that, is that not the essence of a discussion of morality?
I think that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. I like the idea of the chess game, because the way I look at it would be, you're playing chess and your goal is to win the game. The other person's goal is to lose the game. And so every time you make a move, you're like, what are you doing? You're playing wrong. He's like, no, I'm playing just right. And you talk, hey, like, oh, well, your values and goals are completely different from mine. But are they doing something wrong by playing to lose? I don't think that's the part where it's definitely. I think that's the subjective component. I think all moral frameworks have. I mean, obviously, now we're still getting down to, like, really the bottom basement, and we can always say that most people agree on some very basic things, but that's a problem that's just plagued me whenever I've tried to accept an objective framework.
That's Moore's open question problem that you're bumping up against there, and Hogtie actually was intimating towards a solution to that, a semantic solution to that problem. But I'd like to hear what
Ward has to say. Yeah.
Well, I would suggest that there is a choice there on the chess game, but that wouldn't be a moral issue. That's a issue of value, and you can value something that's non-moral. I can value where I live because it has a nice sunset, as opposed to I would put less value on living next to a train track, would wake me up every night. And that's not necessarily moral. I wouldn't characterize that as moral issues.
So are you complaining about Three Hills? You're complaining about Three Hills, Alberta?
Well, that just has nothing.
But a train track going right through the middle of town.
We're awesome. But that's a preference. And I think one reason why I wanted to talk about morality, one of the things was, as we're talking about these issues, I think it can come down to, and needs to come down to, the issue of grounding the morality on what basis. Because if there is no objective basis, if there's no basis that is non-changing for the core, not for every issue, for some of the core issues like murder, like rape, let's say, then if the grounding is human opinion, if human opinion changes, it sure sounds like morality itself is subjective and does not change. It's based on a changing standard on those core issues. And so, as far as convincing people goes, that is an understandable issue, but has no bearing on the ontological status of morality. And so that's why I'm asking about the issue of morality. Is where's it grounded? Where's it found? If it's just human opinion, what follows from that? And it seems like what I would characterize as subjective. Then whatever culture or people groups say that this is okay, ISIS, for instance, then they aren't doing anything wrong, And so that's why I'm asking about the grounding of the issue, where morality is found, and grounding, because within the Christian framework, one of the things I appreciate, and I didn't, I tell you what, for 10 years I did not, but I appreciate is being able to ground morality objectively in the nature and character of the divine. And that being the case, that seems like that reflects reality, where that our moral intuitions are consistent with that, and it answers a grounding question. Whereas once we remove the divine, those moral intuitions that we have that are pretty objective in nature, or objective in nature for the core issues, now it's floating, and that's where I think it leads necessarily to a lack of appreciation for the morality, or not appreciation, a lack of grounding for it, and opens Pandora's moral box to anything with no basis to say otherwise.
Can I ask then? So, if is it your view that if the moral system is grounded in human opinion, then it's not a desirable moral system? That there's got to be a better way. If at the basis of the very floor, is that your objection?
No. I think we need to distinguish something here. Is people who can reject the divine and still have moral claims that are consistent with what I consider to be. Okay, so they can be consistent. My claim is, once we remove the divine, let's say God doesn't exist. Well, what does that do to objective morality? It doesn't. It's no longer objective. There's opinions. It seems like there's moral opinions that we have, preferences, but that would be different in my book. Okay, that would be different than.
Yeah, I'm having trouble seeing the. I'm having trouble finding the difference. I'm not sure how positing a deity makes something objective, because the deity is a mind, and minds are necessarily subjective. So Yahweh would have his own opinions about morality, but Yahweh obviously would have his own opinions about morality, how he wants us to behave. However, I'm not sure you can get a prescription from that, because, as I said, you can always have someone who says, "I don't care." Yahweh wants you this, well, I don't care.
Sorry,
But
Right,
like, you
but
say it's doing something
not
objectively wrong.
that's not a commentary on the divine, on the status, ontological status of the moral thing. That's actually just revealing revealing them. It's like the doctor who says smoking's bad for you and I don't care, right? So that has no bearing on the health of smoking. So people caring or not is not the issue at hand. People don't care, and some people do care. They're on both sides. So we're not talking about the attitude. That's a different issue, though it's very understandable. It's very relevant when you're talking with people. I'm talking about the issue itself. Does that make sense?
Well, kind of. I guess I would just put three people in a room, and one of them happens to be Yahweh, and they all say, "Here's what you should do. This is the moral thing to do." Why is his an objective position while the other two, let's say the other two are human beings, theirs are subjective? What makes his? Wouldn't his be subjective as well, given that it's still a mind, it's still his opinion on the subject?
Oh, that's a great question. As far as my characterization of it goes, and as far as what I understand on the Christian faith, it would be because it's based on his nature and character, not just his opinion, but it flows from his nature and character. He's the brute. He would be the brute fact, the brute source, as opposed to just another mind of equal status. I think we could agree that if Yahweh does exist, for the sake of discussion, our status and his would not be the same. His comes with more authority. His comes with more say-so, but not just for the sake of saying so, but based on his nature and character. Him being a god, him not like in murder because he's a god of life. That's his nature and character. If that makes sense. So it wouldn't be. I wouldn't see him as being, even if he's in the room, he wouldn't be of equal value. That would be presumptuous of us and devalue him. So, and put him in a position that he wouldn't be in. He would be the standard by which it would go by.
Why would this being be the standard? Like, let's grant that the divine being in question is Yahweh and has the traditional theological attributes, the omni attributes and so forth, and
right.
All of those. Why are God's moral recommendations or commands, however you see them, why are they morally binding on us as opposed to JD's, for instance? And I mean, obviously, I can think of some reasons that one might give, but I've never been satisfied with the claim that one can anchor an objective morality in the nature and character of a God. It seems to me that none of the attributes, even taken jointly, imply, logically speaking, that we are bound to obey them. It seems to me that Moore's open question, that the question, what makes that good, can always be asked. I mean, Moore, for those who don't know, G. Moore, the philosopher, was a contemporary 20th century philosopher, contemporary of Bertrand Russell, and he's the person who coined the expression naturalistic fallacy. He, in the course of sort of articulating this business of the naturalistic fallacy, introduced what we call the open question problem. You can always ask of anything, what makes that good? So if a person says, well, I ground morality in the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, why does making more people, satisfying more people, a good thing, right? And then you could say, oh well, because it conduces to such and such, individual happiness or something. Well, what's so good about individual happiness? And you can always ask, what's so good about that? What's so good? What makes that good? The ultimate question here is, what is a good making property, right? What properties or attributes make something good? And it seems to me that when you posit Yahweh or any such God, you can always ask of that God, what makes his commands or his moral prescriptions good? What is it about his nature that makes these things good? And it seems to me that whatever characteristics you can point to, you can always say what makes them good. So, for instance, if someone says, well, morality consists of abiding by God's wishes or God's commands or preferences, or however you want to characterize it, you can say, well, what's good about obeying God's commands? Is there a meta command or a meta divine prescription that says it's good to obey those commands? And then you can ask, well, what's good about obeying that command, and so forth. It just seems to me that the justificatory moral regress problem exists even if you posit a God with all of these attributes. And I'd be curious how you would resolve that regress problem.
Yeah, I see it as a grounding issue. It would be kind of, I would resolve it similarly like this. If someone were to ask, okay, here we have, you posit Yahweh, and it's like, and Yahweh would be, I'm gonna use a different analogy, but a very common one. As the one who brought about, caused the existence of the universe. Well, someone would say, well, what caused Yahweh? Well, understand that question would not apply to the kind of being that Yahweh would be, because he would be, as Aristotle would say, the uncaused cause, by nature, by definition. Now, of who he is, by his nature, his very character, he is the standard. He has the maximally great goodness. He is maximally great holiness. He has maximally great, whatever it is, the maximal aspect of these issues here. So asking in reference to the standard by which he is, asking beyond that is to miss that he starts it. Now, if he doesn't exist, then he doesn't start it.
No, but if he does it,
if a Christian God exists, he is by definition the ground by his nature and character.
But only by definition. That's a stipulation. The question is, what is it about God's nature that makes him a good-making property, or makes him commanding, ordering things?
Like I mentioned, the maximally great. He would be, as we would describe, proclaim, the maximally great being. That's what he would be. Now we say it by definition, but that's true of like bachelor. It's by definition and a married male. Well, what makes that it? Well, we're talking about by definition, but also, of course, more than that. We think revealed in Scripture. There's other things, but understanding the core of that, who he is ontologically is the maximally great goodness.
Wait a minute.
That's why he's the standard.
Okay, wait a minute. You can't say that that one of his properties is that he's maximally good. Goodness is what we're trying to unpack here, right? What's at issue is, what is a good-making property? What is goodness, right? And what makes a good-making property? And so you can't say, well, the reason it's good to obey God is because all his prescriptions are good, because he is ultimately good. What you're supposed to analyze here is the concept of goodness, and presumably you've got to analyze the concept in terms of some other properties, namely divine attributes. What are the divine attributes that amount to goodness? You can't appeal to God's goodness in your analysis of the concept of goodness, because the very thing that you're trying to understand is the concept of goodness.
I gave one example: maximal goodness, maximal holiness, maximal has the maximal attributes.
But what makes him maximally good? That's what's at issue here.
Right? His nature is good.
Well, in that case, we're not really defining goodness as, well, I guess that which God said. I mean, by sometimes you're basically saying God's nature is God's nature, but what makes that nature good, other than simply saying? Right. It seems like the word no longer good has it doesn't have a useful definition. It's basically, well, good is God's nature. Well, what's God's nature? God's nature is good. Well, that doesn't really explain anything.
But talk about moral goodness as opposed to useful goodness. Those are different terms of goodness. Something is useful. So talk about moral good. When we're talking about morality, the standard by which it all would be, by the moral issues would be critiqued, and it answers the question of grounding morality and having objective morality, as opposed to having a morality based on human opinion. It could be culture, could be individual, could be whatever you want to say it. If it's based on these different things, then what follows from that is anything goes with no ending point. Go ahead, JD.
Yeah, I just wanted one before. Ozy also wants to ask another question. You also mentioned that revelation from Scripture is another way you determine that God's nature is maximally good. However, isn't that just another way of saying that God told us that He's good? Since revelation from Scripture is revelation from the God. So God told you that.
It's not the same thing as it. I'm sorry, I cut you off. What was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, basically, you're saying that God, by saying revelation, saying that God told you that He was good.
Well, He's revealed it, and that's fair.
A revelation is God talking to you through text or through voice or through whatever means, in which case He's telling you that He's good.
Well, I've also appealed to moral intuition that we have. Objective moral intuition. We have logical intuition. We have moral intuitions. That's why a lot of people, even atheists, claim is like, this is, I don't necessarily agree with God, but that's objectively morally wrong. Well, that moral intuition I concur with. I concur with their judgment. What I'm suggesting is we need to be able to have a ground for it, and without an objective ground, then we have no basis for that moral intuition being objectively accurate. It could be just we could just have a our culture a bad. We wouldn't even be a bad culture. There'd be no such thing as a good or bad, which seems to follow from that. That's my claim, my assertion on that. Ozy, so.
The question.
I need to get going here in a few minutes, gentlemen. Just so you know, I'm more than happy to revisit this. That's not a problem whatsoever. But please, Ozy.
I would certainly challenge the idea that one can appeal to moral intuitions to ground morality. I mean, I think the issue of moral intuitions can go.
Ground morality. I wasn't too grounded, but go ahead.
Okay, that's because that's what we were talking about. I mean, you can appeal to moral intuitions with respect to questions of moral epistemology. You know, how one establishes what the moral order is and what properly belongs under the heading of right and wrong and stuff like that. But with respect to the more substantive question that we've been discussing here about God's nature and how it connects and undergirds the concept of goodness and the concept of morality, that seems to me orthogonal. So I'm still not satisfied with how positing a God that has a certain nature, whatever that nature is going to imply that this God is good. How do you go from God has this attribute, that attribute, that attribute, and so forth, to therefore God is good? Now you said, well, at one point you said that, well, by definition. Well, okay, but if it's merely by definition, then one could appeal to anything and say, by definition, this is the standard of goodness. Like when you talked about maximally great, what makes that which is maximally great something which is has commandments which are morally binding? The question is, because you're a deontologist, are you not?
I'm sorry, I was reading
deontology, right?
What's your?
Okay. I presume you're a deontologist. You subscribe to. You think that morality is crucially tied to the concept of duty, right?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm reading you wrong then. Could you?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Could you tell me how you?
We're fleshing things out. I'm a virtue ethic. I think deontology. I think duties are important.
Mm-hmm.
But simply doing a duty does not make a person moral. I don't hold to that. I think virtue ethics is the way to go in general. Although duties apply.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, let me backpedal because I was going down a blind alley here. I thought you were a deontologist, and I thought you were arguing for a deontological position here because what you were saying is consonant with standard deontological line.
There is some consistency and unity, so I see why.
Yeah. Okay. But let's go back to the question then. What are the attributes which either taken apart or jointly? What are the attributes that you think imply that therefore God is good and that His commands are binding, morally binding? I mean, what is a good-making property in God, or what are the good-making properties of God? What are the attributes of God that make God good or maximally good in your view? And obviously, you can't use the word good or moral in there because the concepts of goodness and morality.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is, if it's axiomatic or tautological, then it's subjective.
And it's stipulative. It's not subjective. Okay, it's purely stipulative, and you can stipulate anything you want, right?
Right. Oh, sure, you can. And people do, but holiness would be purity. But these concepts are similar, they're akin, but to one another to a point. But his sinlessness, who he is by his very nature, becomes a standard. Like I've said before, becomes a standard by which these things are judged.
How is he the standard? Why is he the standard? What is it about God that makes him the standard?
By his mere existence. I'm positing this is a brute. His existence and his nature, character, his attributes as a brute fact, where you can't get beyond that, because to get beyond that is to get past him. And then if that happens, we're on the very route that, well, first of all, it doesn't do justice to him, but also that keeps us on the very route of there is no basis. And if there is no objective basis for morality, then what we have is just opinions, no matter where they come from, and we actually have no, in my estimation, where I think it goes, there actually is no moral right or wrong. They're just moral preferences. I just prefer that people don't kill my family, but it's actually not right or wrong any more than choosing a different salad dressing down the aisle.
Well, that might be the case though. That's, I mean, that's not really an argument for objective morality. It's more like an argument that the alternative doesn't sound good, which I agree it doesn't.
That's an ad baculum argument. Like if this theory isn't true, then I don't like the consequences of what it implies.
The argument is how do we ground our objective moral intuitions, and it's inference the best explanation.
Wait a minute, that's not the argument. That's not the question I was asking at all.
Well, that's where we're going. That's where we're going with it. You talked about the art. Well, because the whole thing's being cast into a broader category, whereas simply just do we ground morality in the universe, in people's opinions, in this or in the divine. Now, if we're going to be talking about how does that fit, in the whole spectrum, I'm not saying it proves in the empirical sense. I'm saying here in one issue we have inference the best explanation. What's the best explanation for objective morality? It would be the divine. Once you remove that, what do we have? We have some serious moral problems, and other things follow. So what do we have as far as the world that we observe, what we see, what we have? What's the best explanation? And it seems to me, hands down anyway, the divine is the best explanation for objective morality, and it puts a pin.
How can a definition, you said it's true by definition. How can a definition constitute an explanation?
Well, a
definition is never an explanation, right?
Yeah, no, it's not a definition that does it. It would be God's very nature and existence, which is a brute fact, and it's often called by definition.
But now you're saying it's a brute fact.
Simply a definition. I'm not saying it's simply a definition.
No, but if it's a brute fact that he's moral, that's not an analysis. That's not an answer to the question, what makes God moral? You're just saying he just is. It's a brute fact about his character that he is moral. There's not something about his character that makes him moral. He just is moral. But that's, now you've not analyzed or unpacked the concept.
Well, about his character doesn't make him moral. About his character is moral, because make him moral can imply becoming non-moral. So if it makes him moral, that could imply him not being moral, and I don't want to go there.
No. If something is what it is, and there are characteristics that make it have a certain property, then it has that property, and you can't just rob it of that property without robbing those characteristics. So if God has certain characteristics that are good-making characteristics,
a sinlessness. I talked about these types of properties.
Sinlessness. But look, you keep.
Can I give it a shot here?
Let's say one thing. When you talk about holiness, purity, and sinlessness,
right,
these are moral characteristics. These are moral predicates.
Right.
I'm trying to understand how you're able to predicate any moral qualities to this God. I want to understand what makes this God moral, and you're saying, well, he has all these moral qualities.
Right.
What is a moral-making quality? What is a right-making or a good-making quality? Yeah. Normally, these things are cashed out in terms of his certain attributes that he has. But it seems to me that you can't say that he's good because he's sinless. Because he's sinless just means he doesn't ever do anything wrong. He only does good things. Right. Well,
which is consistent with his nature and character. Truthfulness. It might be that his character is that he's sinless, but that's not an explanation of the concept of goodness. You don't have an account here. What you have is a definition. You posited a being that is morally perfect. That's fine. You can posit such a thing, but then that leaves open the question: what makes this being? What are the attributes or qualities? They can be integral. They can be essential qualities of the being that can't be denied. Okay, but what are those qualities that make God good? In other words, what are the good-making properties of God? It's just Moore's open question. It seems to me that Moore's open question. Understanding what they are as opposed to what they are two different things. But as I mentioned, the attributes that make it's not like what attribute that's separate comes to him to make him good. That's actually would be incoherent in my estimation.
I think I'm positing the Abrahamic God here. Presumably, his attributes are his attributes. They're inalienable. You can't not have them.
Right.
He has them by nature and necessity. So, and not just logical necessity, but by some kind of metaphysical necessity. So there's no question here. You don't have to sort of worry about, oh well, someone might try to deny that he has these attributes. He's got the attributes that he's got. I just want to understand what the attributes are of God that make him a good being.
Yeah, that's where I was going to
constitute his goodness, right?
If I can jump in for a quick moment,
Please.
my issue would be let's say that Yahweh's what Yahweh wants is that for every conscious creature he creates and that exists in reality to suffer forever. Would that just simply be good because it's his nature to be good, and therefore suffering for all conscious creatures would necessarily be a good thing? Because let me just leave it at that. Would you still consider him that is his nature? Since his nature is goodness, him wanting everything that ever exists, that could exist, to suffer eternally is a good thing.
Well, I think that goes along the lines of, can God make a rock too big for him to pick up?
Oh, not at all. No. I mean,
No.
perfectly
Let me finish. Right? No, let me finish. Because I don't think he could ever do that. So I would say no, and he has not ever done that. He has not created a place, and he wouldn't create a place to where I'm going to create you guys just to suffer. That's not it. That's not. He couldn't do that, and he can't do things that are inconsistent with his nature and character, which is goodness.
Right. Well, like I said, but goodness is his nature, right? And so, if his nature is you said goodness is his nature.
One of his characteristics, yes.
Right. Well, so in that case, if his nature is to cause suffering for all existent beings, that would be good by definition, correct?
No, it wouldn't. See, that's the whole point. Is it wouldn't be good to it because it doesn't make God's goodness would not be arbitrary. This is the some Christians would posit what you're actually saying. Okay. I say, well, he can do whatever he wants. I say that just doesn't make any sense at all. God can't do whatever he wants because he won't want to do what is inconsistent with his nature and character. God cannot make a square circle. It's just not logically possible. He can't want to create people to.
Let me try and clarify a little. Let me see if I can clarify a little bit. What I mean is that we haven't actually determined under your particular framework that suffering is a bad thing. We've only determined that it's God's nature to do good.
Suffering was a bad thing. What you said was create all people to suffer for eternity, and I said no.
Right. Why would he not be able to do that? Is that a not good thing? If so, I thought his nature was to do good, so that would be a good thing if he was doing it, wouldn't it?
No. See, I would say he couldn't do that because God is not a God of death. The suffering aspect would be a separation from him. This comes from Thessalonians. Separation from him, and he's not a God of death. He's a God of life. And so.
Well, I didn't mention death. I mentioned suffering.
Not death. What's that?
Well, I didn't mention death. I mentioned suffering.
I know, but I know that. But nonetheless, those are to me associated. But that's okay. You can say suffering. He's not a God about suffering. He's a God about love, and he's a God about life. And his goal is for people to love him, love one another, have a fantastic life, glorify him, honor him, and enjoy forgiveness when we do things wrong. Enjoy that. And forgiveness is to be enjoyed, and to have a life set free, so to speak.
I guess my issue is how do you determine that suffering for all creatures is bad outside of God's nature?
Well, that's just it. I don't think you can.
Well, in that case, then how can you say that he would not want everything to suffer? But you're saying that his nature is good, so if that would simply be the good thing. We haven't actually established a way to determine that it isn't.
Well, that would make God's commands whatever arbitrary. I'm saying that they couldn't be arbitrary because there are things, as revealed in Scripture, for instance, that make his nature non-arbitrary. No matter how much we understand about his nature or not, there's things that he cannot do, and that's consistent with his nature. He only does things consistent with his nature and character.
Everything can only do things consistent with its nature. I mean, a stone can only do things consistent with its nature, which is not much. But
yes, but what happens is people come up when it comes to God and Scripture. People all of a sudden start inventing new ways of thinking about these things, okay, and you're probably familiar with this, and all of a sudden make up new ways of reading Scripture and interpreting, and it's just up to me. They make up new things about the divine. So, for instance, they'll say things along the lines of, well, since he's God, he can do whatever he wants. But just because he's God, it doesn't follow that he can do whatever he wants. Just because he's God, it doesn't mean, and he's sovereign and control. Some people say, well, and I talked to some atheists last week about this. Well, then he's forcing everyone to do this because he's sovereign. It means he's in control. That's not what sovereign means. It doesn't. Those things don't follow from it, and it's a mischaracterization of the issue, in my estimation. Hog tie.
Yeah, I think you were. This is your. I think JD. How would I say this? First off, I don't think the counterfactual is generally helpful when you ask a question that not you. When JD says, well, what if God was like this? What if God told us all to wear, purple hard hats all the time? Well, then what would you think of your God then? Well, God hasn't asked us to do that. So that would be a counterfactual question, which I find generally don't help. Although in this case, I think it did, because you did, towards the end of your response, start giving some examples of God's character that are what Ozy is seeking, I think, is good-making properties. So the reason I mention this is that I've heard Ozy ask this question a number of times about what are the good-making properties. When you say God is good, what is it about God that makes him good? What are the good-making properties? So, Ward, I want to tell you what I hear when you answer the question is put by Ozy. It would be like if I said, well, my friend Justin is he's in the military, he's a very good sniper. And you say, really? Well, what is it about Justin that makes him a good sniper? Because you want to know what are the things that are properties that lend themselves to making someone being a good sniper. And I say, well, because he's a good sniper, and when he's out sniping, he's good at the sniping. And it's okay. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. And I don't mean to mock what you're saying, but literally that's what I hear when you describe the goodness as being part of God's character and God being the exemplar of goodness. It just seems to just using the same words again and again. A more correct answer on the sniping one would be to say, well, Justin is a good sniper. He's got some qualities that tend to lend itself to good sniping. He's got very good vision. He's got a lot of field experience that helps him understand when he's looking through the scope, who's a good guy, who's an innocent person, who's a bad guy. He's able to calm his breathing. And I can give you a list of good sniper making properties. And I think what Ozy has been for some time, not from you, but from others, trying to elicit is, what is your account of the good-making properties of God that lead you to the conclusion that God is good, and not simply by restating
I've actually listed several of them about truth. One, I mentioned that only once. Holiness. I've mentioned characteristics as far as love goes. These are qualities about God, the divine, that he is the standard by which they're all judged. He's a God of life, not death. That's his goal. So I've actually talked about these and mentioned them more than just good is good. I don't think I've done that.
No, I think we got to keep in mind, we have this discussion with a lot of different people, and a lot of times that's the point where the wheels are spinning, and that's why you can hear the energy in my voice. I'm a little excited because you are listing some of those properties, like about valuing life over death and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, Ozy, does that get us a step closer? Because I always suspect you have a follow-up question, and you've never had somebody who's been able to get the ball that far downfield.
Yeah, actually, those qualities that you were listing when you were describing God as a person, those I think are good-making properties. Now, when we're talking about ordinary people, and we say, well, so-and-so is loving, so-and-so is generous, so-and-so is forgiving, so-and-so is merciful, so-and-so is charitable, and so forth. These are all virtues. So-and-so is patient, so-and-so is temperate, and
Sure.
These are qualities that we value in a person. Now, there's a reason why those things are qualities and why we value them. So I can say, from my standpoint, based in a secular virtue-based ethics, I can say why those are admirable qualities and why, taken together, they constitute a good person. And I could say the same of God. I could say of God, well, if he is kind and patient and forgiving, those I think are good-making properties. Okay, but you got to be careful there, though. I can explain for people why those are good, because they conduce to flourishing. A person that exhibits the virtues of temperance, of patience, of humility, of generosity, of charity, of bravery, and so forth. All of the of honesty. All of these virtues. Anybody who exhibits these properties is going to benefit from ataraxia and eudaimonia. I mean, this is going to result in flourishing in the eudaimonian ideal. It's going to tend towards that. So that would be my account for grounding these things. But one can always ask. But so that's the grounding of it. Is that it conduces to flourishing? But is there something? I mean, are you going to try to ground God's attributes of mercy and honesty and so forth in flourishing? I mean, does it help him flourish? Does it help in heaven or something like that? I mean, one could imagine Olympian gods, for instance.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand it. I mean, take away the universe and you have God. Okay. Mm-hmm. These properties aren't there to help him; they are his properties.
Right. We exhibit some of these properties ourselves too, and they do help us. And to the extent that they help us towards flourishing, is why we value them and label them separately as good properties. That's why
which is it's a different issue, but it's a misnomer. We can't. What applies to the creation does not. It's not an equal application to the Creator. Okay. Just because
I would agree. I would agree. It makes no sense to say what I just said of people to God. God is not a social creature who exists in a society who.
Well, I think he is a social creature, but not in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. He might be a triune being, but he's not the kind of social animal that we are.
Right.
Which flourishing is a telos, right?
It's a little bit. Yes. I appreciate the flourishing analogy. I appreciate it very much. I would take it, as you could well imagine, a few steps further. Well,
you think there's more to flourishing. I mean, there's spiritual flourishing.
Right, but flourishing with the purpose of honoring the Lord and living a life to honor Him based upon His standard, and that would help make life worthwhile and have eternal results.
Yeah.
So there's obviously more to it on both sides. Gentlemen, my half an hour is up.
Right. Well, thank you. It's been a very generous half hour.
I really appreciate the time, though. I really appreciate the questions, and I'm hoping I can give some semblance of of an answer that is direct. I would like to be able to do this again sometime if you gentlemen are open to that.
Sure.
We can pick up where we left off. But I know there's 1,000 questions to discuss. So.
No, I really want to encourage that too, Ward. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation, and you've heard me allude a couple of times to, sometimes it doesn't go well. You're familiar with Hangouts, and the Hangouts on air is kind of the bridge you got to cross, and I'd really encourage you to do it. We do this quite often. You will find that there are many believers and non-believers, a lot of non-believers that are, you'll recognize, I don't necessarily want to hang out with those guys. And that's fine. But I share your contact details with people here, and we'll be in touch with you. And certainly, I'd really encourage you to participate in these things because you're very lucid on these issues, and it's always good to have another voice that isn't another internet troll.
Oh,
Well, yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, for the next time, instead of Hogtie and Ozy, I think I'll bring in Chaswald and Rob Beasley, because that would be much more conducive to
now you're talking
conversation. That's a little inside joke. They're not pleasant people.
Well, bless them, whoever they are. But thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate the time, and I think that I would look forward to, as long as we I think you guys are into that, maintaining. Let's discuss the issues, break down the separate categories of where we're at, and I think it's very helpful for other people to see that, compare and contrast. Helps us and helps me think through my position as well, and I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I really appreciate your candor. As Hogtie said, that sometimes we reach impasses where people sort of feel that a certain question is a trap or something like that, and they're not very open to answering the question in a forthright way. And I thought that this was very different, so I really appreciated this your participation in this. Thank you very much for agreeing to this discussion.
Gentlemen, God bless each one of you, regardless of this existence.
Yeah, thank you for coming on.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, well, I think we'll. I don't think we need to make any special closing comments or anything. I think we'll just close out here. And if
unfortunately, Dreas had to leave us. Sorry, thanks for Dreas too.
Thanks, Dreas, for introducing us to your professor. He's very fun to talk to. All right, we're going to move to off-air time and possibly start an off-air hangout if the interest arises. For those watching, thank you for watching.